Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of our second season of the OSINT hellhole. Hopefully we're not going to be running into any production issues on this one, because it's our first attempt at recording anything instead of just doing a Twitter space, but today I'll be here joined by my co-host Zach.
Hello.
So let us just get into the topics we'll be covering today. Overall, we're going to start with Poland's expected K2 and Borsuk contract signings that are, according to various sources, supposed to happen before the end of this month. We have Ukraine and Dhiel Defense signing a memorandum of understanding. Germany revising its debt brake rules. Roshel gave us an update on the number of Senator armored vehicles delivered to Ukraine. Some armor plates out of specification were delivered to Oshkosh and used in the construction of JLTVs. Then we're going to have a segment by Zach covering Europe and long-range strike missiles. And then we're going to close out with the last 2 weeks of Ukraine aid and our viewer questions. So, Poland was supposed to have contracted its second tranche of K2 main battle tanks last year in September. Negotiations have obviously dragged out, but news has come out that supposedly contracts for K2 for 180 K2 main battle tanks and 81 support vehicles based on the K2 is supposed to be signed before the end of the month for an expected total of 5.63 billion euros. Now, it is to be noted that none of these vehicles are expected to be built in Poland, because Polish production is not slated to start until 2028. And these vehicles with current K2 production capacity are expected to be delivered by 2028. Additionally, there is also supposedly going to be a contract for 116 Borsuk infantry fighting vehicles, which would total for 1.42 billion euros. That it's taken Poland this long to get anything signed for Borsuk at all has been surprising. But it's good to see that we'll likely get these contracts before the end of the month. Then we have Ukraine and Dhiel Defense signing a memorandum of understanding. The two want to form an industrial partnership to open the way for major industrial projects, whatever that could be, as also facilitating a threefold increase in the supply of air defense missiles and air defense systems. This is likely, and it's probably expected, that this will take the form in localized production of these systems in Ukraine to at least some degree. While Ukrainian industry could also, for example, be providing parts to German industry to speed up production. What exactly the threefold increase is going to include and from what point it is measured is unknown, because if this is a threefold increase over 2024, then we're going to be looking at 12 air defense batteries and 1,200 missiles. If this is a threefold increase over 2025, then it's 24 batteries and somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000-3,000 missiles. But it's good to see that we have additional momentum going into IRIS-T-SLM, as it has practically become the standard European air defense system for medium range. Then we've probably got the likely most consequential part of the more ground related news, and this is Germany's changes to its debt brake law. Previously, it was only allowed to have so much deficit spending without having the Bundestag approve what was called a special fund, which was what happened in 2022 when the Bundestag approved a 100 billion euro special fund for the German armed forces. The changes that they have gotten through now basically exempt all defense spending above 1% of GDP from this law, meaning that everything above 1% of GDP can be financed through debt. They have also made some slight alterations to what defense spending entails, including things like military aid to Ukraine, but also natural disaster relief, civilian resilience, and so on. But this definitely entails that we will likely see a increase in the German defense budget, likely to 100 billion, which is not something we all really expected to happen a couple of years ago, I think. Of course, we also got an update from Roshel. This was their first update on the number of vehicles delivered since September 2024. They now state to have delivered over 1,700 vehicles of the Senator family to Ukraine, which is an increase of 300 vehicles over the last update, but this is still far below the company's claimed production capacity of over 200 vehicles a month. So whether this is a theoretical production capacity, where if the entire company were to be allocated to the production, they could reach this, or if this is merely a budgetary problem where not enough vehicles are being contracted, is not really known. But we still have a lot of vehicles going to Ukraine and likely a lot of room left for contracting, which would be really good if countries would actually make use of it, because it might not be great armored vehicles, but it's better than an unarmored Toyota Hilux. Then we have our last ground-based topic for the week, and this is going to be Avras North America Incorporated having done some questionable things with its employees skipping mandatory hardness testing for 12,800 armor plates. A good number of these ending up with Oshkosh, who used them in the production of the JLTV. This explains some of the phenomena we've seen with the JLTV, where some units already started showing cracks in their armor plating. Currently, an FBI investigation is going on, so we're likely not to get too many updates about this topic until the court case rolls around. So now we're getting into missiles.
Yes, there has been a lot of news in recent days about the status of European missile stocks, what is next for Ukraine. As all of you probably know, Ukraine has been using Storm Shadow and the Scalp missiles from Britain and France for the past about 2 years. The first announcement came out in early 2023, I believe, where the United Kingdom announced that they had given Ukraine a handful of Storm Shadow missiles, which were used to attack the Russian systems in both occupied areas of Ukraine and in Crimea, and sometimes even in out at sea near the coast. So those missiles have been running out. Ukraine has essentially been on a timer since these announcements came out that these missiles would eventually run out, because France and the United Kingdom do not really have huge stocks of these missiles. So it's been roughly close to 2 years since this announcement came out, and we have now witnessed fewer and fewer missile strikes using the Storm Shadow on Scalp EG systems. However, these systems are no longer produced in Europe, as far as we know. The French have an active line for the Scalp EG system, but we're not sure if they're producing new missiles or whether or not they're basically servicing existing missiles that they have sold. Well, regardless of whether or not they're producing new missiles, everybody knows that the capacity there is extremely lacking, and they're unable to produce new missiles in quantities that would be great enough to supply Ukraine. So a pressing question then has been, what is next for Ukraine? Before the US elections, a lot of people were expecting that at some point the US would start transferring its AGM 158A missiles, the JASM, the joint, well, you guys know the JASM. So a lot of people were expecting the United States to start transferring those missiles, especially because it has 2,000 missiles that are, you know, set to be expired or retired from service in the coming years. There was also other potential missiles such as the Joint Standoff Weapon, the JSOW, which is not really a missile, but it does have the range to and the stealth capabilities to reach deeper into Russian occupied territories and do real damage to the system out there. However, things have not really panned out to Ukraine's interest due to the standoff that they're having between the current U.S. administration and Ukrainian leadership. So the pressing question for the past few months has been, what happens next? Well, we're not really sure. A lot of European stocks, when it comes to systems, strike systems, are critically low. This is because the Europeans have not procured long-range strike missiles in a very long time. All the stocks that they have right now are things that have been procured over the past 35 years. And technically speaking, as of recording right now, there is only a single active production line for air-launched cruise missiles in the entirety of Europe, and that is the Norwegian Naval Strike Missile slash Joint Strike Missile. So, what are the overall stocks in Europe, and what can be done to help Ukraine in addressing these issues? So the biggest stocks in Europe right now are the German Taurus missile and some remaining Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. Germany has, as far as I know, likely the largest stocks of missiles in Europe when it comes to airline cruise missiles. They bought 600 Taurus missiles back in when the system was new, and ever since then, about 300 of those missiles have been upgraded through a midlife upgrade program. And by 2018, it was reported by German newsletters that 300 of them were in operational readiness, while the remaining 300 were likely inoperable or had significant issues where they needed to be overhauled and upgraded again. Outside of that, there is the British with about 450 to 700 Storm Shadows. This is from an overall stock which started at about 1,000 Storm Shadows. We believe that combined, both the British and the French have donated about 300 to 50 to 400 missiles to Ukraine. This is at best what we can deduce right now from what we've been told by people who are like very familiar with this topic. So that would leave the British with about 450 to 700 at best missiles, which is slightly higher than the Germans, but we do not know of those stocks how many of them are ready and operational to be used and how many are like non-operational. After them, we have the French with about 300 to 400 scalps of their own. Again, with these numbers, we're not really sure how many of these missiles are ready and operational for use today. Nonetheless, outside of those nations, the stocks within Europe are very low. The Italians have about 200 of the Storm Shadow slash Scalp missiles, and then there is the Finns with some smaller JASM variants, the earlier JASM variants. There's the Poles with about 70 of those, the Finns, similar number, about 70 of those. And then you have the Spanish with even lower numbers of uh, older Taurus missiles, about 43 of those. We don't know how many of those are active even. So the stocks right now are extremely low. And there is little insight in terms of what can be done in terms of like re reindustrializing Europe to start producing these missiles. But there is some good news when it comes to systems like Taurus, even though the former German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has refused to transfer any of the 300 operational missiles that the Germans have to Ukraine. There has been some new developments for the system, especially at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. There have been a lot of developments for Taurus. So in October of last year, the German Defense Ministry announced that they were looking at ordering 600 new Taurus Neo missiles. We do not know much about these missiles, just that we know they're looking at about 600 of these. There was some speculation in the news that some of these missiles might be longer range. They might have new seeker methods or guidance options. They might have longer ranges. They might have bigger warheads. But there isn't really much out there. The only things we know so far is that the quantity is about 600 missiles, and they're looking for these missiles to be delivered or start delivery at the end of this decade, around 2029. The price tag for all 600 missiles is expected to be 2.1 billion euros for the entire project, and they have so far requested about 550 to 530 million euros to kickstart the initiative of procuring these missiles. Uh, at the end of last year, around November, December, we also got some news that confirmed news that was reported earlier during the year that the Germans are now looking to refurbish the half of their Taurus stocks that were not upgraded earlier. And the German Defense Procurement Agency awarded a contract to Taurus Systems, which is the joint venture company between. Uh, it's a joint venture initiative between MPDA Germany and Saab that makes this missile. So a contract was awarded to them. We don't know how big it was, but earlier this year, around March 2025, there was a 143 million euro contract that was awarded to Saab by the same joint venture so that they can start servicing for the remaining stocks of the 300 missiles. This contract is expected to last between 2025 to 2035, so it covers a 10-year period, and it's going to involve essentially overhauling the existing missiles, the 300 existing missiles, to a similar capability to the ones that have been upgraded prior to 2018. During the same period, a month earlier, in February, the Swedish procurement agency, FMV, basically announced that they have been given the go ahead to start procuring new Taurus missiles for the Swedish Air Force's Gripen aircraft. This is supposed to fill, what is it called? Standoff weapon requirement that the Swedish Air Force has had. Apparently, the program was ongoing for quite some time now, and they have come to the conclusion that the Taurus missile is going to be what fills this role for them. We don't know how many missiles they're going to be buying or like the price tag for the contract, but this is a very significant move for this missile, given now the Germans are looking at 600 new missiles on top of the 600 they already have, 300 of which are being refurbished. This would bring German stocks by the end of the decade to about 1,200 missiles. Um, so the Swedes are taking advantage of this capability and the fact that the Germans are perhaps restarting production very soon and they're buying in with them. We don't know how many they're going to be buying, but it will likely help reduce the price tag overall if they buy the system in huge quantities. The Swedes already operate the RBS-15 system, which is also made by Saab, but this system is a anti-ship missile, and although it is said to have some ground strike capabilities, it does it does mainly do anti-ship tasks. That is what it was created for. It has the seeking options. It has a radar guidance as opposed to infrared or optical guidance. So it is a an anti-ship system. But the Swedes have this capability. The latest versions of that missile have a range of about 300 kilometers, which make them slightly less capable than all the other missiles mentioned here. It would not be really a viable option for Sweden if it came to striking targets in response to Russian aggression in Russian controlled areas. So Sweden is clearly looking at this new Taurus capabilities and they want to integrate that into their Gripen fleet. And they're taking advantage of the fact that the Germans are now procuring a higher number of missiles. So there is so much happening for Taurus, and it is great to see. The big question next will be how this translates to helping Ukraine. Will Germany now be willing to transfer missiles to Ukraine now that it's planning to procure like double what it has, or and given they're practically the only other nation here that can basically step in and help Ukraine, because all the other European nations, even though many of them have pending orders, none of them have the stocks that are as big as the Germans right now. We do not know this, as I mentioned earlier, we do not know the status of both British and French stocks, and we don't know how fast that can be serviced in terms of bringing the existing stocks they have to operational status. And overall, there is the question of whether or not these nations are willing to go below the current stock levels. We don't know how much they've given, but it's clearly a lot of missiles to Ukraine. And there's a big question in these capitals whether or not they're willing to dip below what they've already given. So I think it would be a good moment for Germany to step in and donate these missiles to Ukraine while ordering perhaps significantly more than they've already announced. And this would perhaps allow the capacity to be built up all around Europe. Um, Bigger question would be what is happening with the Norwegians. Clearly, they have the largest production capacity in Europe when it comes to air-launched cruise missiles that are small enough. When you talk about the Joint Strike Missile and the Naval Strike Missile, both of which can be integrated on aircraft, those missiles have long ranges, about 555 kilometers publicly, and they are produced in really, really like high numbers compared to any other thing in Europe. Norway, like Kongsberg, the company that makes these missiles, has set up a production facility in. It's looking to set up a production facility in Australia. I think they've broken ground for that facility last year, and then they're setting up a new production facility in the United States, and they already have existing facilities in Norway to produce these missiles. I deduce that the production capacity they have might be enough to deliver low hundreds of missiles per year. And there are a lot of nations ordering these missiles. The Naval Strike Missile has practically become the Harpoon replacement for all of Europe. So the need is there, the production capacity is there, the missile is relatively cheap. Now the question is, will Europe or these other nations be willing to order missiles for Ukraine from Norway? Or will Norway itself even be willing to donate some of its own missiles to Ukraine? As it stands right now, outside of France, Italy, maybe UK depleting their already limited stocks of Storm Shadow, there is practically only the Taurus and the joint or naval strike missiles remaining to be given to Ukraine. So big questions, and I hope we get answers soon. Moving on.
I do believe that both of these are going to be a case of integration more than will to deliver.
Well, I mean, like,
U-
it's yeah.
Ukraine's Su-24 fleet is not doing all too great, and it's not known how much more time they have left. France is France has delivered 6 Mirage 2000-5Fs, but it's unknown if Dassault, for example, would be willing to do the integration.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
And then there remains the question of what will carry Taurus. Because even if Taurus is delivered, it still needs to be carried by something. And right now, F-16 is a big question mark with how the US has been behaving.
Yeah, yeah. So that is also another big sticking point. But if we go back a few years ago, the Storm Shadow thing came out of nowhere. Everybody was like really surprised with it, and I don't think we've gotten any great number of details of how long the integration took. But
We actually did.
all right, how
From
long?
a UK Parliament hearing,
Mm-hmm.
we had the then defense minister, I can't remember who it was, state to a question in Parliament that it took him all around 4 months to jury rig something up to fire the missile from the Su-24, but all of the mission prep still had to be done on ground.
I believe Ben Wallace might have been their defense minister at the time, but do not like quote me on that. 4 months is pretty short. With Taurus, I think that is going to be a bigger problem than when it comes to naval strike missile or joint strike missile, because the Norwegians have already kind of paid for the integration of that system into the F-16s. The question is, though, is this for their F-16s, or would this work on the current F-16s that have been donated to Ukraine? I think the problem would be less uh, like severe when it comes to integration with the F-16 for the Joint Strike Missile and the Naval Strike Missile. But for Taurus, yeah, that is going to be a very big issue. There is Taurus integration for other platforms, for example, the F-15K that the South Koreans operate, but I don't think any feasibility studies of any sort have been done well, as far as I know, I don't think any feasibility studies have been done for integrating a system like that with an F-16. So, yeah, question then is, will they be integrating such a capability on the Su-24s, or would they be doing it on the F-16s? Because the Su-24s are not doing so well, as you mentioned, and those platforms are basically prime targets for the Russians, even though they have stopped kind of lopping these missiles in as great numbers as they were doing many like a few years prior. So, yeah, how how would they do that integration, and how fast could they do it? I hope if they move forward with it that it's done very fast, and that they can they don't meet any significant bureaucratic challenges from the Germans. I really hope that's the case. But
So in
stepping away
in
from
the
this.
in the case of Germany, just to quickly round out the topic, in the case of Germany, currently all of their military aid budget has been contracted.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were going to do Taurus donations, they'd have to appropriate additional budget for 2025. This is likely already on the table because there has been talk about an additional 3 billion for a couple of months now.
Mm-hmm.
And with the recent debt brake changes, it is expected that this 3 billion is to be granted the moment the new government takes office.
Okay.
So that would be the earliest point at which such a process could begin.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, let's let's hope that they kind of address this problem. But moving away from this, like in terms of what Europe can do, we also have some news from Ukraine itself on some of its homegrown missiles. For example, the Neptune. It was reportedly recently that on a strike that took place on a few days ago in Russia was done by a long version of the Neptune missile, which is Ukraine's own homegrown anti-ship missile that was involved in sinking of the Black Sea flagship, the Slava class cruiser in the early stages of the war. So news of this long range version has been around for quite some time. I think like we first started hearing about this back in 2023. I remember seeing news pieces talking about it back in early 2023 that a long range version of this missile was in development to increase its range by giving it perhaps more fuel, but there was really nothing concrete. Obviously there is I mean, like it's a great missile, but the range has been really lacking. And on top of that, there has always been the question of whether or not Ukraine is even able to produce this missile in great enough quantities. But I believe in 2024 we got some news from Ukrainian sources that they were able to produce about a few hundred of these missiles. I'm not really sure whether or not that is at the lower end of the hundreds. I think that's the case. So it's great to see that they're able to do this because this would put them above the production capacities that almost all European missiles, short of the naval strike missile and the joint strike missile, have right now. So they're able to produce during wartime a few hundred of these missiles, and they were able to do so in 2024, while the Russians have been out there trying to strike these facilities as fast as they can identify them. So this strike in a few days ago was reported to have been carried out by these one of these long range variants of the Neptune missile. I don't think we've seen pictures or any sort of indications for what it would look like. My possible guess would be it's a lengthened version of the current Neptune. There was possible discussions of the missile having a new updated guidance and navigation system, which would make sense. The Neptune, as it was originally designed, was meant to strike ships at sea, and when you're kind of dealing with that problem, it's a different kind of target set, and you can
It's
have
a lot easier to detect a large, big floating metal structure in the
yes,
open sea than it is to target a fuel container in the middle of a refinery.
yeah, absolutely. Like big, large metal ships glow in the radar bands. It's easy to see them, and these missiles often use radar seekers so that they can see through fog, all that stuff, and they're not really as heavily affected by atmospheric stuff or what time of the day it is. But when you kind of move away from that to striking these facilities, you might want to get something that is a bit more precise, that will get to the target a bit better. Instead of just hitting the shiniest object, you wanted to hit something pretty specific amongst a sea of shiny objects. So they talked potentially about giving it, a new waypoint system so that it can perhaps get around Russian air defense system. They might have identified along the path. This is a common thing that long range land attack cruise missiles have. For example, the Tomahawk, perhaps some versions of the Scalp and a bunch of other missiles might have this too. It allows them to use you know GPS navigation or other sorts of navigation to get around areas to hit specific waypoints. And then for the final kill, they might deploy something like a IR seeker or an electro optical seeker to fine tune their target set and then find something specific within a broad area and strike that specific thing. So this is great news for Ukraine that they're able to not only announce this missile but also get it done and working within the span of 2 years. So this is great news, and I hope that Europe can help them hone this capability and perhaps maybe outsource some of this production, like the more pressing things like the engines or something of that sort, to Europe so that they can then focus on everything else about the missile and trying to produce as much of that as they can. Um, in the past, when this topic has come up, a few people have also potentially have brought up the potential use of better engines, better small engines that might have been developed in the West for this missile, and whether or not that was one of the ways they would increase the range while also keeping the size compact. Maybe you don't get a longer missile, you get a missile that fits in the same canister, which is something that have been mentioned in recent article, that the new missile fits in the same canister as the old one while also having longer range. So getting better engines that have uh, better fuel consumption would be one way to do that, while maybe even slightly increasing the length of the fuel tank.
No, so I think we're then going to start rounding out the episode with our look into what's been pledged and delivered to Ukraine in terms of aid in the last couple of weeks. And we're starting off immediately with a very surprising discovery with a South Korean K711A1 cargo truck.
Interesting. South Korea hasn't really been donating a ton of equipment to Ukraine. I feel like it's been really challenging to actually get them to commit to this cause, at least on the military end. So, how did this end up there? Was it like direct donation from
We
South
we
Korea?
don't really know how it ended up there, but the only possible way it could have is through the South Korean government, because the A1 variant of the K711 is not available on the second-hand market, nor has it been exported.
Hmm.
On top of that, the unit markings were still relatively visible on the front bumper.
Okay.
And a
So
Korean Defense Bloc on Twitter was able to identify which parent unit it belonged to, and that unit itself had not yet fully transitioned onto this truck.
interesting. So this is direct donation from the South Korean government. A very big first step, I'd say, like more than they have done in the past.
Now, in and of itself, this could still be designated under humanitarian help. As it is a cargo truck, it's a multi use item. It is not specifically a military good. So that might be the loophole they're using to do this, but we just don't know.
Yeah, I believe their stance before has been that they're not willing to donate
They've
non
they've
like
not been willing to donate any combat equipment,
yeah.
with the major exception for the K600 mine clearance system, which is an armored engineering vehicle based on the K1 main battle tank chassis, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
But these have been pledged over a year ago, and there's been no update on them so far, to the point that I'm expecting them to only be delivered once a peace deal with Russia is actually signed.
Wow, that's pretty shitty. You would expect, for the Korean government to basically change up its policies when it comes to Ukraine, given the sheer amount of aid North Korea has been willing to give to its ally Russia, uh, from at the beginning start of giving them ballistic missiles down to artillery systems, and now we have North Korean soldiers directly embedded with Russians fighting on this war. So the fact that the South Korean government continues to just move around this in a way that they don't want to be involved and they don't want to be seen as being directly involved is very weird to me, in my honest opinion.
Especially with how much money they could potentially make, especially with exports of artillery ammunition or
Absolutely.
or even air defense systems, because at some point we're just going to grab whatever we can get.
Yeah. No, that's I feel like a big missed opportunity potential here, and the past excuses for why they're not willing to do that. The fact that I've seen this thrown around, which is that the Ukraine is an active combat situation, an active war, that they're not willing to sell to nations involved in with things of this kind.
It's
I'm
it's
not.
it's not so much that they're not willing; it's that they're legally not allowed to, according to their export laws.
But then this.
However, this is something that they could change with a majority vote in parliament.
Yeah, but I'm not really sure how much of this is like reality or like nitpicking because they have exported systems to the Gulf nations while those nations were directly involved in conflicts in Yemen and Northern Africa, especially in Libya. So like the question then is how come
What counts as a war?
yeah, and why do these restrictions seem to apply when it comes to Ukraine, but they don't seem to apply when it comes to, uh, you know, the Gulf states in Yemen or in Libya?
Because if we're going to be really nitpicky, Russia has never actually declared a war on Ukraine.
Hmm.
So if we want to be really nitpicky here, we can make that argument.
Yeah, that would be. It's after all, as they say, a special military operation, not an active war.
Well, then we move on to Romania, who has seemingly over the past couple of months delivered an unknown number of CA-95 short-range air defense systems. These are basically Strela 1 turrets on BRDM-2s. So not an overly complex or by modern standards capable system, but it's a system nonetheless. Then we have Portugal, who surprisingly disclosed that they have, over the past couple of months, donated 8 SA-330L Puma medium transport helicopters to Ukraine. These were previously used by the Portuguese military, but had then been placed in storage and have now been transferred to Ukraine, who also operates the Puma helicopter within the Ministry of Internal Affairs already, so they already know the system. The ones Portugal donated were a lot older than the ones Ukraine has, but there should still be some commonality between the two. And then the last delivered item came from Turkey, with the Russians capturing one and destroying another BMC Kirpi-2 MRAP in the Kursk region. Kind of a surprise to see the Kirpi-2 show up, especially seeing that Ukraine up to this point had only received the Kirpi-1 MRAPs and had only done so relatively early on in the war with about 200 delivered, but then no further updates on additional deliveries ever came from Turkey. So it was surprising to see the Kirpi-2 show up, especially knowing that it's only been in production since 2018 and that the one we saw captured specifically was a 2018 model. Then we move into pledges, and here we had probably the UK stealing the crown with its pledge for 5,000 LMM short range anti air missiles. which are to be fired from both Striker HVM, which they donated 6 to Ukraine at the start of the war, but also from additionally pledged Rapid Ranger short-range air defense systems, which is a new turret capable of firing both LMM and Starstreak, built upon a Eurovam tech.
This missile is pretty interesting to me. It's one of the like unique missiles out there in terms of like capabilities. Even though it's like surface to air missile, it's also air. It can be used in like air to air. It can be used to air to surface or surface to surface or surface to air. So it's a pretty multi-role missile as it's LMM means lightweight multi-role missile. So it's a small, unique, and extremely capable missile with an operational range of like 8 kilometers. It's gonna be very useful for Ukraine. They don't really get donations this big of missiles of this caliber or capability. The only thing I would compare it to from prior would be something like the Stinger, and I don't like if the US were to donate 5,000 Stingers, that would be for example more than 60% of the entire Stinger stocks of missiles ever bought by the United States, which is about like 8,000 missiles. So this is a pretty big donation.
This is more than likely going to have an impact on predominantly Russian Shahed strikes, but it's also going to bolster Ukraine's defense against the medium and larger reconnaissance drones that are proliferating across the front line.
Absolutely. Not to mention helicopters, which have sort of become kind of rare within like the extreme ends of the front. So this would, contribute to pushing them even further away so that they're not seen anywhere.
The only caveat to this donation is that all the missiles pledged are to be new production, but the UK does have domestic production capability for the missile. I just can't say what the production capacity is like, but if they're willing to pledge 5,000 missiles, we're going to assume that it is at least roughly capable of making 1,000 a year. Expecting to run a production for 5 years solely for deliveries to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. I believe the United Kingdom prior to this ordered about 1,000 missiles for themselves, and in like early like end of 2019 2020, and they expect all of them to be delivered by 2025. So they might have used that at some point to step up the production capacity of the system, which is why they might feel capable enough to donate this level of missiles to Ukraine, which is kind of big.
Then we have France pledging 4 SDZ mine clearance systems. These are sort of a converted skid steer system, so they're not meant for frontline usage, but specifically for mine clearance in liberated areas specifically. Then we had Sweden giving me my largest, my most liked 8 list update of all time, with them pledging 18 Archer 155mm self-propelled guns and 5 Archer counter battery radars. The Archers in particular are all going to be new builds. So these have been contracted with Saab, which means they are more than likely going to be mounted on the German HX2 truck chassis instead of the articulated Volvo chassis we are so used to seeing. I myself am not that particularly well known with the Archer counter battery radar, but I've been told that they're pretty good, and seeing these systems go to Ukraine is going to be a lot more useful going forward, as Ukraine is going to have to be more sparing with artillery ammunition, particularly in the counter battery role, as US supply is likely to dry up in not too much time.
Yeah, I'm hoping Europe can really step up to perhaps fill that gap. Uh, it's been long enough, I think, for everybody to invest as much as they can to try to up the production. And as far as I know, the Germans have at least been keeping pace in terms of investments. And really, I say investments, but they've been buying a lot of companies up so that they can say that the production has been increased. But there are some investments happening, and shifts are being changed up in a lot of facilities around Europe. I know that has been happening in Finland and in a lot of other countries around Europe, Central Europe, and Western Europe. So, hopefully the artillery situation isn't so bad, even if the US can no longer be counted upon in this area. I feel like the artillery and the ground system areas are an area where Europe is extremely well positioned in helping Ukraine, as opposed to the air defense situation and the air-to-air situation and the ground strike situation and things of that sort. But when it comes to things like vehicles, so MRAPs, IVs, AVs, or APCs, things of that sort, and artillery rounds, things of that sort, I think Ukraine is well positioned in terms of what it can get from Europe.
Within Europe, in that specific instance, we're also starting to see a shift, especially within the automobile industry. With, for example, Volkswagen announcing that they would be open to produce parts for the military industry, as they have had a slump in car sales and a lot of their parts manufacturing is currently sitting idle.
Yeah, wasn't it like Rheinmetall that was talking about perhaps using some of this excess capacity at like some of the automobile facilities to do some production of defense-related equipment? So yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
good
it's
situation to be in.
Rheinmetall is also looking to buy one of the factories that Volkswagen is going to be closing down. KNDS has recently acquired a rail car manufacturer specifically for the production of parts for military equipment. There's an Audi factory in Belgium that is likely going to be sold to the defense industry in not too long. So there is movement. What real capacity this is going to translate into is unknown, mainly because it's all going to then depend on actually contracting the capacity that's created.
I think that would be very useful.
So, with that, I think we're going to be rounding out the episode with the 2 viewer questions we had submitted prior to recording this episode. So, start spicy. Thoughts on how the current admin may affect readiness for a China conflict. I'm going to assume that this is talking about the US.
Yes. So if I take this question, uh, it's really hard to say yet. Uh, uh, it's really just a waiting game in terms of there's like so much going on at the same time, and we haven't really seen the new budget request come out, which will probably mostly be shaped by the former administration, the Biden administration. In terms of what is happening right now directly, well, we have a continuing resolution that was like signed into law like yesterday or today. Well, 2 days ago, I think, March 15th, I believe, signed into law. So that will continue with the current funding levels and things of that sort. It's not bad, but it's not great. It's below where the United States needs to be in terms of like the DoD and coming out of the Physical Responsibility Act, which went into effect. rather recently, and is already like going out of effect. So the situation is highly volatile. It's really hard to say, and I can't make a judgment right now. We have to wait and see what happens. What I will say is, in terms of US credibility, the current admin is undoing a lot of things that the Biden administration has sort of worked hard to develop. It's hard to say how this will translate into the relations we have with, they have with their allies in the Pacific region in terms of like the China fight, but it's not probably great. The ongoing spat with NATO nations, with Canada, with Mexico, is probably not going to reflect well on the United States and the DoD and what it's trying to do in terms of fostering great relations and the rule of law and all that stuff in combating China in the Pacific region.
Yeah,
And
it's not going to reflect well on the we are here to impose the rule of law when you're illegally occupying most of Canada.
yeah, it's gonna really affect the weight that what the DoD and what the State Department say, the weight that carries with nations that are currently facing territorial issues with China, the Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. So, and then there's the Pacific Island nations. The whole relationship in Europe is kind of now being shaped up by this administration to kind of be a protection racket. So you pay me to protect you kind of deal, or else bad things are gonna happen to you. That is not a great setup. That's not a great thing for a sitting U.S. president or a vice president to kind of angle their relationship with European allies who've died beside them, who have fought in many wars with them. The only time Article 5 of the NATO treaty has been, the Washington Treaty has been invoked was coming to the aid of the United States. So, yeah, it's not great. It will probably impact how allies look at the United States. It will impact how they react, how they behave, the kind of access the U.S. might be able to get in the regional bases they have there that they have access to. So they've been making great headway with the Philippines and a bunch of other nations. For example, Papua New Guinea, which is something that a lot of people do not think about when they think about the broader Pacific, happenings. But there were protests that were ongoing with the deal that they had to sign with the United States, the Defense Cooperation Agreement at the time with the Biden administration. So you can barely imagine what that is going to translate into with the new administration. It's not going to be fun. I think a lot of damage is being done right now. And a lot of people, I know a lot of people are saying, well, we can't be fighting both in Europe and in the Pacific region, which is like, well, you don't have to, but you also don't have to cut off allies like this because how you treat Belgium, how you treat Greenland, how you treat Canada, how you treat Mexico, how you treat Germany also reflects on you uh, when these other nations look at you.
So then, probably it's going to be a question for me. What do you see as a feasible short to medium term main battle tank and infantry fighting vehicle platform that the Ukrainians could use to replace current losses? The MBT question is going to be easy. That's going to be refurbished T-64s and T-72s.
That is
Neither
surprising. I was
Europe,
gonna say the Leopard.
Europe does not have the capabilities to deliver new Leopard tanks to Ukraine in the short to medium term. From statements from KNDS itself, the lead time for new tanks is at least 24 months from ordering to delivery. We already have capacity locked in for Leopard 2A8 orders within Europe. That's going to be Germany itself with 128. It's going to be Lithuania with 54. It's Sweden doing a lot of upgrades and potentially buying new tanks. Croatia buying 54. There's already a lot of Leopard 2A8 capacity and production backlog buildup to the point that if you order now, you're going to have to wait till that backlog clears up until you can get your tanks. Or you need to order in such a volume that KNDS finds it worthwhile to expand production capacity. But then you're also again looking at least at 24 to even 36 months before you're starting to get tanks.
But, I would have to add that, 24 months kind of seems like a lot, but this war has kind of been on, like, it has been going on for more than 36 months now. So, yeah, I agree with you, but I feel like this is kind of one of those self-imposed things. We should have been really working on this like 2 years ago. But as you say, I do agree that the best short-term case would be the existing tanks that they already kind of are familiar with using. So, yeah.
This is also coming back to Ukraine being an ex-Soviet state, meaning that it got a lot of Soviet inheritance. According to Sung Zhu on Twitter, Ukraine inherited at least 1,500 T-64 BVs.
1,500.
1,500 T-64 BVs, and then about an additional 500-600 T-64As. That's a lot of tanks that have been sitting in storage in Ukraine. Now, mind you, we have to subtract what's already in service, what's been lost from that, but that should still give us a large reserve of tanks that could be refurbished. Same goes with about a 5 to 600 T-72s that were still in Ukraine at the start of the war. Those tanks we've likely already seen being refurbished into things like T-72 AMTs. So Ukraine still likely has enough leftover tanks that it could carry on for a while. It just needs the help with refurbishing that the Czech Republic and Poland are offering. Post-war is going to be a different question for tanks, where we're probably going to see a T-64, T-84 120 hybrid, where they rip out the 125mm gun and the autoloading system and replace them with a 120mm gun and a bustle autoloader, for example. So that it fires standard NATO ammunition, but that's more of a figment of my imagination at the moment and not something that I'm particularly that I think is going to happen. The IFV part of the question is going to be a lot more difficult because here you're basically stuck with somewhat 4 options in Europe. There's going to be CV90, which is, the popular kid, but also the one with the largest production backlog, which includes an order for at least 180 units for Ukraine, which is going to start production next year. How long that's going to take to deliver is not known as far as I know, but I'd have to check that information. So don't take my word on that one. But here again, Ukraine has a need for a lot more than just 180 IFVs. So you're likely going to be looking at least double, if not triple, sourcing platforms. This then brings you into both ASCOD and Lynx as other options. and potentially even Borsuk going forward if Poland sets up a large enough production line that it can meet both their domestic demand and export orders. So those would be your options, but those would all be mid to long term solutions because Europe really doesn't have armored vehicles to spare at the moment. What might still happen, and this is one thing I'm going to expect we see happening this year, is that Germany is finally going to place the needed orders for Puma, that it can replace its entire Marder fleet. So we're likely going to see more of those go to Ukraine in the near future. But here we're also again talking about a roughly maximum of 250 vehicles, so still not enough to make up for potential losses, and definitely not enough to finally replace the BMP-1. But still a decent amount of vehicles that should hold Ukraine over until actual production capacity for modern platforms is set up. But with that, I would like to thank you all for listening. We are going to try and do this as a bi-weekly podcast going forward, so one episode every 2 weeks. In the future, we might do special episodes covering one specific topic where we'll invite a couple of guests to talk about it. But otherwise, this is going to be your standard format going forward. If you do have any questions for us, then you can leave those down in the comment section or on the replies to the social media posts about this episode, or on the OSINT Hellhole Discord, for which you can find a link down below. The show notes, which will also include all the sources that we used for this episode.
Yes, you can either tag Jeff or me in any of our social media platforms that we currently use. I am mainly on Blue Sky. I'm no longer on Twitter. I believe Jeff might be on both. So
I'm still on both, sadly.
yeah. So you could tag him with your questions there, and you could also just tag me on Blue Sky with my questions there. I am not completely off Twitter, but I do not check it anymore. I log in once a month to check what has been going on, who's been tagging me. So if you do that there, your questions might be responded to much later. But I would prefer if you guys are, if you have questions, you guys are goals, then you can just, tag me on Blue Sky.